What happens when a grandmother's love confronts the pain of loss and unexpected joy? Margaret, an American grandmother, lives her life marked by challenges, but always with a heart full of hope. Since her youth, she faced poverty alongside her husband, George, whom she met in a factory. Together, they built a life based on love and unity, raising their two daughters, Jessica and Emily. Despite the financial difficulties, the family found joy in the little things. However, Margaret's life took an unexpected turn when Emily, the youngest daughter, felt suffocated by poverty. Frustrated and desperate for freedom, she ran away from home as a teenager, leaving her parents devastated. Margaret and George searched for her tirelessly, but Emily's absence left a void in their hearts. Over time, Margaret dedicated herself to raising Jessica, who, despite her emotional scars, managed to move on and get married. Margaret's fate changes again when an abandoned baby is left at her doorstep. With renewed love, she decides to raise the girl as her granddaughter, naming her Lily. As the years go by, Lily becomes a ray of light in Margaret's life, filling the emptiness left by her biological daughters. However, life has more surprises in store. When George falls seriously ill and needs a liver transplant, the past reveals itself in a surprising way. The truth about Lily is unveiled, revealing that she is, in fact, Emily's lost daughter. In this scenario of love, pain, and discovery, Margaret faces a new challenge. Lily's generosity shines through when she decides to donate part of her liver to save her grandfather. But during this process, the family discovers the tragic death of Emily, who had left under painful circumstances. Now, as Margaret comes to terms with the loss of her daughter, she feels grateful to have Lily in her life. Over time, Lily becomes a dedicated lawyer, helping the vulnerable and honoring the memory of her biological mother. Margaret's story is an ode to overcoming unconditional love and resilience in the face of adversity. It is a tale about how, even in the most difficult situations, hope can blossom and love can transform lives. Margaret gazed at the horizon from her porch, lost in thought. Life had taught her to be strong, but the recent pain of losing Emily still haunted her. The weight of that absence felt like a burden that grew heavier each day. Lily, now 16, was the light in her life, but the truth about her origin cast a shadow of uncertainty. How could she explain all of this to the girl who had become both her granddaughter and her savior? That day, Margaret decided it was time to talk to Lily about the reality they both shared. Entering the living room, she found the young girl sitting on the sofa, surrounded by books and legal papers. Lily's determination to help others was admirable, but Margaret wondered if the young woman was ready to discover the truth about her past. Margaret's gaze lingered on Lily's concentrated expression, which reminded her of Emily. It was as if her daughter's presence was there, in every smile and every caring gesture. "Dear, we need to talk," Margaret said, trying to hide her voice's tremor. Lily looked up and smiled, but there was a growing concern on her face. "Of course, Grandma. What's going on? You seem worried." Margaret sat down next to her granddaughter, taking a deep breath before starting. What she didn't expect was for the conversation to turn into an emotional storm. The words came out slowly, but Margaret knew she could no longer postpone it. It was time to face the truth and the challenges that would come with it. Meanwhile, at school, Lily faced her own challenges. The pressure to stand out was mounting. Her classmates admired her, but there was a constant anxiety in her mind. The image of her biological mother, whom she had never met, loomed over her like a shadow. The desire to understand who she was and to find her own identity consumed her. And now, with the imminent revelation of her origin, that search felt even more urgent. When the conversation with Margaret reached its climax, the revelation that Lily was Emily's daughter left the young girl in shock. She stood up abruptly, her eyes filled with confusion and pain. "How could you hide this from me, Grandma? I am her daughter." Anger began to mix with sadness, and Margaret felt her heart tighten at her granddaughter's reaction. "I wanted to protect you, Lily. I didn't know how to tell you. I loved your mother, even though she left in such a tragic way," Margaret explained, her voice choked. The pain of both was palpable, and the space between them felt like an abyss. Outside, the storm began to roar, reflecting the emotional turmoil unfolding inside the house. The rain fell heavily, and the winds howled as if nature were in tune with the agitation in Margaret and Lily's hearts. Both felt lost, separated by a past they still did not understand. Meanwhile, George was fighting his own battle. The need for a liver transplant made him vulnerable, and he felt like a burden to the family. The pain of seeing his wife and granddaughter in conflict tormented him, and he wondered if he would recover in time to bring the family together again. The man who had always been the pillar of the household now felt powerless, and this fragility left him restless. As the days passed, the relationship between Margaret and Lily began to deteriorate. The trust that had been built was shaken, and each felt alone in her pain. While Margaret tried to find ways to redeem herself and reconnect with Lily, the young girl felt increasingly lost in her insecurities. Lily's internal struggle to balance the pain of losing her biological mother and the need to understand the grandmother who raised her left her exhausted. Tension grew, and with each passing day, the uncertainty about the future became more oppressive. Margaret questioned whether she could overcome this new phase of her life, whether she could repair what seemed irreparable. She remembered the lessons life had taught her, but applying them became harder than ever. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, Margaret prepared to face the greatest battle of her life, the fight for her granddaughter's love and the memory of her daughter. Time became an enemy, and hope, though present, seemed distant. Both needed to find each other again before the storm separated them forever. Margaret felt a lump in her throat as she watched Lily walk away, anger and confusion etched on her face. The echo of the door closing behind her granddaughter reverberated in her soul. The storm outside intensified, but the true hurricane was within her. Every tear rolling down Lily's face was like a blow to Margaret's heart. She had promised to protect the girl, and now, instead, she had deeply hurt her. In the following days, the tension between the two escalated. Margaret tried to reach out, but each attempt was met with cutting silences and cold glances. Lily locked herself in her room, surrounded by books she couldn't read, and Margaret found herself lost in memories of Emily, questioning whether she had made the right choice by keeping the truth hidden for so long. Each thought forced her to confront her own pain and deepest fears. Meanwhile, George, who was struggling with his health condition, watched the situation unfold from the sidelines. He felt powerless, unable to help the two women he loved. The pains in his body were nothing compared to the anguish he saw in Margaret's eyes, and Lily's anxiety felt almost palpable. He knew he needed to do something, but the weight of his own suffering left him paralyzed. The idea of a liver transplant loomed over him like a shadow, and the uncertainty about the future made everything even harder. George decided it was time to act. On a rainy morning, when the sky seemed to reflect the melancholy of the house, he called Margaret for a talk. "We need to talk about Lily and about you. Both are suffering, and that worries me," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. Margaret looked at him, the pain in her eyes mingling with the concern she felt for her granddaughter. "I don't know what to do, George," Margaret confessed, tears starting to form. "I feel like I've lost her, and I don't know how to regain her love." George looked at her, realizing that Margaret's struggle was not just against the pain of loss but also against the guilt of having hidden the truth. "You need to be honest with her. It's the only way to heal this wound. But you also need to allow yourself to feel the pain. This battle can't be faced alone." George's words resonated with Margaret. She knew she needed to confront her own feelings before she could help Lily. But every time she thought about opening up to her granddaughter, a wave of fear paralyzed her. What if the truth pushed them further apart? What if Lily couldn't forgive her? Meanwhile, Lily continued her struggle. The stigma of being the daughter of a woman who had left so early consumed her. She tried to stand out at school, but the pressure to be perfect became increasingly unbearable. The image of her biological mother, whom she had never known, loomed over her like a weight. Amid all this, her friendships with classmates began to deteriorate. Some didn't understand what she was going through and left her behind, while others tried to help, but their attempts were misinterpreted. One morning, during a break, a classmate approached Lily and said, "You don't have to carry that weight alone. We're here for you." But instead of comfort, the words felt like a reminder of her solitude. Lily stepped away, her heart heavy. She wanted to scream, but the pain silenced her. Weeks passed, and the tension between Margaret and Lily felt like a thread about to snap. Margaret decided she needed courage. One night, when the storm finally subsided, she sat at the table and wrote a letter to Lily. With a trembling hand, she poured out her pain, her memories of Emily, and the struggle she faced to raise her granddaughter. She acknowledged her mistakes, her hesitation to tell the truth, and the love she still felt for Lily. The next morning, Margaret left the letter on the kitchen table, hoping Lily would find it. When the young girl saw the envelope, her heart raced. She hesitated, but curiosity overcame her. As she opened the letter, tears began to stream down her face as she read Margaret's words. The vulnerability of her grandmother touched her deeply, and something in her heart began to stir. The first honest conversation between them was forming, but the journey ahead was still long and fraught with obstacles. Margaret knew that everything depended on Lily's reaction, and doubt haunted her once again. Would it be enough to restore the trust between them? And George? Would he be able to confront his own fragility and be the support they both needed? Uncertainty hung in the air, but it was a step toward reconciliation, a step Margaret hoped could lead them back to the light. Lily held the letter with trembling hands, her heart racing as Margaret's words danced in her mind. The vulnerability of her grandmother touched her in a way she hadn't expected. But at the same time, she felt confused. The pain of having been deceived for so long was still fresh, and the revelation that her past was more complicated than she imagined cast a shadow over her emotions. Determined to confront Margaret, Lily made her way to the living room. Her grandmother was sitting on the sofa, her gaze lost in the window, as if waiting for something that would never come. When Margaret saw her, her heart raced. The tension in the air was palpable. "Did you read the letter?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Lily nodded, her hands moving nervously. "Why didn't you tell me before? I deserve to know the truth." The words came out unfiltered, but there was a fragility in them that Margaret noticed. "I thought I was doing what was best for you," Margaret replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I wanted to protect you from pain. But I understand now that I only caused you more hurt by hiding the truth." A heavy silence settled between them, and Lily's expression shifted from anger to sadness. "I don't think I'll ever understand why you did this. I'm not a child. I can handle the truth." Margaret felt a wave of guilt. The pain Lily expressed was like a sharp blade, cutting through her defenses. "I was wrong, Lily. I didn't want you to feel like your mother didn't love you. But you have to understand that I was hurting too. I lost Emily, and you are all that I have left of her." Tears began to slide down Lily's face. "But you didn't let me be a part of that. I'm her granddaughter, and all I wanted was to understand who she was." The emotion in Lily's voice echoed in the room, and Margaret felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. At that moment, a siren sounded from outside, cutting through the conversation. It was an ambulance, and the reality of everyday life invaded the emotionally charged space. Margaret, unsure of what to do, stood up and looked out the window. George's heart was fragile, and the idea of a transplant weighed heavily on everyone. She remembered the conversations they had, the fear that accompanied him, and how he tried to be strong in the face of pain. "He's going to the hospital," Margaret said, her voice barely audible. "We need to go to him." Lily looked at her grandmother, the anger and pain still present, but concern for her grandfather began to take over. "What happened?" she asked, a thread of panic in her voice. "I don't know, but he wasn't feeling well. Come on, we need to hurry." Margaret took Lily's hand, and the two rushed out of the house, the tension between them still palpable, but now a new challenge united them. On the way to the hospital, the silence was heavy, but there was a growing understanding that life did not stop in the face of their disagreements. George's fragility, the pain they were all feeling, and the urgency of the situation forced them to reconsider their priorities. Margaret's revelation was no longer the focus. Now, George's health was what mattered. When they arrived at the hospital, Lily's heart raced. She had never seen her grandfather so fragile. He was lying in a bed, pale and tired, but when he saw the two of them, a weak smile formed on his lips. "Hi, girls," he said, his voice still hoarse. Lily felt her heart tighten. "Hi, Grandpa," she replied, moving closer to the bed. Margaret sat beside him, holding his hand, and the connection between them felt like an anchor amid the emotional storm they were living through. George tried to be strong, but the worried looks from his two beloved women made him realize he was more fragile than he thought. "I'll be okay, I promise," he said, but the words didn't carry the same weight as before. "I just need some time." Lily looked at her grandmother, and the pain that had once separated them now seemed like a bridge. They were together, facing this new challenge, and George's strength became a reminder of what truly mattered. The love they shared was stronger than any secret or lie. In that moment, the two women understood that overcoming wasn't just about confronting the mistakes of the past, but also about their ability to unite in difficult times. Margaret's revelation had been painful, but now, in the hospital, facing George's fragility, they found themselves compelled to reconsider their priorities. The journey of healing was just beginning, and the road ahead would require courage, trust, and, above all, love. Lily felt the weight of the situation as she watched her grandfather in the hospital bed. His fragility was a brutal reminder that life was unpredictable. The revelation about her mother's past and the truth Margaret had hidden still echoed in her mind, but at that moment, what mattered most was George. As they waited for news from the doctors, Lily sat in a chair next to the bed, holding her grandfather's hand. Her touch was gentle and comforting, but George seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts. Margaret, on the other hand, stood up and began to pace the room, restless. She was grappling with her own emotions, trying to process the pain she had caused Lily and the uncertainties surrounding George's health. "Dear, you don't need to worry about that right now," George said, trying to reassure his granddaughter. "I've always been a fighter." But the words weren't enough to dispel the anxiety that hung in the air. Lily looked at him, realizing that the bravery she had always admired was now shrouded in a veil of fragility. "But I'm worried, Grandpa," she replied, her voice trembling. "I don't want to lose you." Tears began to slide down Lily's face, and she quickly wiped them away with her hand. George felt her pain and, even in his state, tried to comfort her. "Look at me," he said, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine. You're strong, just like your mother. Remember what I always said, life goes on, no matter what happens." Those words pierced Lily's heart, but the pain of the revelation about his past still weighed on her. She struggled not to let it consume her. The truth was that while she dealt with George's fragility, the unresolved issues with Margaret still loomed large in her mind. Margaret stopped walking and approached the bed. "George, you need to rest," she said, her voice soft but filled with concern. "The doctors are doing their best." Lily saw how her grandmother leaned over her grandfather, and the connection between them was undeniable. It was a love that withstood the test of time and storms, but now it was being challenged. What once seemed to be a strong relationship was now being tested in the face of fear and uncertainty. Lily felt as though she were caught in the middle of a storm, unsure of how to escape. The past, which she believed she had left behind, was returning with a vengeance, and all her insecurities and fears were bubbling to the surface. As the minutes dragged on, Lily decided she needed a moment to herself. She stood up and walked out of the room, seeking the fresh air of the hospital corridor. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. "I am strong," she murmured to herself, trying to convince herself. But the truth was that inside, she felt broken. The passage of time was becoming a burden, and each second felt like an eternity. Feeling suffocated, she decided she needed to talk to someone. She found a passing nurse. "How is my grandfather?" she asked, her voice trembling. The nurse smiled encouragingly. "He is being well taken care of. The doctors are closely monitoring his condition. He is a fighter, and that helps a lot." The nurse's words brought a little relief, but Lily's worries were still present. "And my grandmother? Is she okay?" "Your grandmother is holding up," the nurse said. "She worries a lot, but she's doing what she can to help him. It's important that you take care of yourself during this time, too." Lily thanked her and walked away, reflecting on what the nurse had said. The idea of taking care of herself felt strange, almost selfish, but she began to realize that she needed to be strong, not just for George, but also for Margaret. Both were dealing with their own pains, and the tension between them still needed to be addressed. Returning to the room, Lily found Margaret with watery eyes, yet still steadfast beside George. "Grandpa, do you remember the story you used to tell about the pirates?" she asked, trying to bring a bit of lightness to the moment. George smiled slightly, as if it made him feel stronger. "Of course, my dear. They were brave and always found a way to save themselves. Just like me, right?" Lily looked at Margaret, and for the first time, the weight of the revelation felt a little lighter. They were together, facing the storm, and maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal, both for George and for themselves. The unspoken words still floated in the air, but in that moment, love and hope seemed to be the anchors that kept them united. As the hours dragged on, the atmosphere in the hospital room was a mix of hope and despair. Lily watched her grandfather, the figure who had always been synonymous with strength in her life, now vulnerable and fragile. The conflicting feelings within her left her restless, but they also ignited a determination she didn't know she had. Even in his weakened state, George still tried to comfort everyone around him. He had always been the pillar of the family, and now, even on the brink of uncertainty, his words still had the power to echo and resonate. His courage was becoming an example for Lily, who began to realize that even in the most difficult situations, there was space for hope and overcoming. As memories of the pirate stories and the adventures George had recounted floated in her mind, Lily remembered how those narratives had always inspired her to be brave. She looked at her grandfather and decided it was time to face her own challenges. With a gentle touch on George's hand, she made a silent promise to herself, not to let fear take over. Margaret, observing the interaction between grandfather and granddaughter, felt a wave of emotion. She realized that George's strength was still present, albeit in a different way. The love he shared with Lily reflected Margaret's own internal struggle. She was grappling with the weight of her past choices and the pain she had caused, but now she saw an opportunity to reconnect with her granddaughter, to seek a new path toward reconciliation. Lily gathered her courage and said, "Grandpa, you've always taught us about the importance of courage. I want to be brave like you." Her words were sincere, and George, despite his difficulty, smiled, realizing that his struggle was touching his granddaughter's life in a profound way. At that moment, Margaret approached. "But I want to apologize. I know I haven't been the grandmother you need. I've been reflecting on everything that has happened, and I want you to know that I want to be here for you." The vulnerability in Margaret was evident, and her words, though difficult, opened the door for a new dialogue. Lily looked at her grandmother, feeling the weight of those words. The anger and confusion she had carried inside were being replaced by a desire to reconnect with the woman she had always loved. "I also feel that we need to understand each other better, Grandma. It's hard for me, but I'm willing to try." The conversation between grandmother and granddaughter was an important step. As George watched, he felt that, somehow, his fragility was transforming into strength for the two women he loved. This moment of vulnerability not only united them but also paved the way for healing and growth. Lily realized that overcoming was not just about facing external challenges but also about dealing with internal ones. The pain she felt regarding Margaret and the past was becoming part of her growth. By accepting her grandmother's help and seeking reconciliation, she was, in fact, allowing her own strength to emerge. Time passed, and although the uncertainties about George's health still lingered, the atmosphere in the room changed. Love and hope began to replace sadness and fear. Lily, now more confident, started to understand that adversities could be opportunities to learn and grow. She was becoming a new version of herself, someone unafraid to embrace her emotions, to open up to vulnerability, and to seek support from the people she loved. The connection among the three generations was strengthening, and Lily began to realize that true wealth was not just about what one possessed materially, but about the bonds built throughout life. As days went by, Lily applied the lessons she was learning. She became a support for Margaret, helping her deal with her own emotions and find a new purpose. Together, they began to rewrite the family history, a story marked by pain but also by overcoming and love. And so, amidst uncertainty, the three generations found a new path. They realized that although life was full of challenges, the strength that blossomed from love and understanding could guide them. Lily's journey was just beginning, but now she knew she was not alone. With that, her transformation became evident. She was finally learning to trust herself and accept the love surrounding her. As days passed, George's health became increasingly unstable. Fear crept into the hearts of Lily and Margaret, but there was also a new determination pulsing in the hospital room. With the connection they had established, they both felt more prepared to face whatever was to come. They knew that regardless of the outcome, they were together. One night, as the rain softly tapped against the window, an alarm sounded in George's room. Lily's heart raced. She looked at her grandmother, who was by her side, and felt a chill in her stomach. Nurses rushed into the room, and panic filled the air. George was in critical condition. The tension was palpable. Lily grasped Margaret's hand, seeking comfort in the strength she now felt beside her grandmother. "He will be okay," she murmured, more to herself than to Margaret. Her grandmother simply nodded, her eyes filled with tears, reflecting her own uncertainty. The following hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Nurses came in and out, and doctors spoke in hushed tones. Lily felt as if the ground was opening beneath her feet. The fear of losing George paralyzed her, but at the same time, the memory of the stories he told encouraged her. She remembered how pirates bravely faced storms, even when everything seemed lost. It was then that an idea sparked in her mind. If George had always taught her about courage, perhaps it was time to show him that she had learned the lesson. Standing up, Lily decided she needed to do something. She turned to Margaret, her heart racing. "Let's do something for him. Let's show him that we are here, that we love him." Margaret looked at her granddaughter, admiring the determination shining in Lily's eyes. "What do you have in mind?" "Let's tell him a story. Our story. The story of our family. A story of love and overcoming." Margaret hesitated, but Lily's determination was contagious. They positioned themselves beside George's bed. His breathing was weak, but there was still hope. Lily began to speak, her voice soft and steady. "Grandpa, you always told us about your adventures at sea, about the courage that pirates had. Now, we want to tell our story. The story of how you have always been our captain, our guide." Margaret joined Lily, and together they began to narrate the moments they had experienced as a family. They talked about the challenges they faced, the joys and the sorrows, but above all, they spoke of the love that always united them. Each word was like a current of hope, an invisible bond forming between them. As they spoke, something magical happened. George's expression began to change. He seemed to hear them, feeling their presence. The light in the room seemed to shine a little brighter. The connection between grandfather and granddaughters intensified, and even amidst fragility, a wave of love filled the space. Lily felt she was doing more than just telling a story. She was showing George that the courage he had always taught her was alive within her. And in that moment, she realized that she didn't need to be perfect. Life was made up of ups and downs, and what truly mattered was the connection they shared. When they finished telling the story, a comforting silence enveloped the room. Then, something surprising happened. George slowly opened his eyes, and a faint smile appeared on his face. He looked at the two women he loved, and with a weak but loving voice, he said, "You are my greatest adventure." Tears streamed down Margaret and Lily's faces, but they were tears of relief and gratitude. They felt that regardless of what happened next, they had connected in a deep and meaningful way. The love they shared had become a beacon amid the storm. In that moment, Lily understood that true strength was not just in facing challenges, but in allowing oneself to feel, love, and support one another. She had learned that overcoming was not a solitary journey but a shared crossing among those who care. As night turned into day, and the sunlight streamed through the window, Lily felt she had taken a huge step in her journey. Regardless of what the future held, she now knew that courage and love were the true riches of life. And with that, she was ready to face any storm that came her way, alongside her family. The light of the new day flooded the hospital room, bringing with it a sense of renewal. George, though still fragile, seemed more present, as if the story told by Lily and Margaret had rekindled a flame within him. Nurses entered, checking vital signs, and a shy smile blossomed on one of their faces upon noticing the improvement in the patient's condition. Lily observed everything, her heart beating more calmly. She remembered the anxiety and fear that had consumed her the night before, But now, a new hope was growing within her. George was there by her side, and the love they shared seemed to have a healing power. Around her, the atmosphere was charged with emotion, and she knew that what they had done was not just an attempt at comfort, but a true act of love. Margaret, holding George's hand, looked at her granddaughter and smiled. "You were amazing, Lily. He heard you. He always listened," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Lily smiled back, feeling that she had made a difference. "I just wanted him to know that we are here," replied Lily softly. "That he has always been our captain." George, now a bit more aware, looked at the two women he loved. "You gave me strengths I didn't know I had," he murmured, his voice still weak but full of sincerity. "I always knew family was important, but I never realized how much I needed you until now." George's words deeply touched Lily's heart. She realized that she had learned not only about courage but also about the importance of vulnerability. It was necessary to open up, connect, and allow others to see their fears and hopes. The following days were filled with small advances. George began to recover slowly, and the medical team was optimistic. Lily and Margaret's visits became part of the daily routine, and they shared new stories, reminiscing about happy moments and sharing laughter. Each visit was an opportunity to reinforce the connection they had, and the hospital room transformed into a space of love and healing. One afternoon, while watching George sleep, Lily remarked, "You know, Grandma, I realize that the stories we tell are not just about the past. They help us face the present and shape the future." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly, dear. Stories connect us, give us strength, and remind us of what really matters. And we must keep telling them even when things get tough." George woke up just as they were speaking. "What are you discussing?" he asked, his smile lighting up his face. "About how important stories are," Grandpa, Lily replied, her eyes shining. "And that we always need to remember to tell our own." George smiled, and his eyes sparkled with the wisdom that came from years of experience. "And never forget that, even in storms, it's love that guides us. Keep telling and living those stories. They are what keep us together." His words echoed in Lily's mind, and she realized that despite the fragility of life, there was an indomitable strength in her family. The love they shared could face any challenge. As days turned into weeks, George was finally discharged from the hospital. The three embraced tightly, feeling the joy of being together again, stronger than ever. Lily looked around, admiring the sun shining in the sky. "This is just the beginning, Grandpa. We will create new stories together." And so, with renewed determination, the family ventured into a new chapter of their lives. Each step would be a new story, each laugh a new memory. Lily knew that regardless of what the future held, there would always be love and courage to guide them, and that together they could face any storm that came their way. Time passed, and after leaving the hospital, George felt revitalized. The fragility that surrounded him during his hospitalization was now replaced by renewed strength. He knew that the experience had transformed him, not only physically but emotionally. The stories Lily and Margaret shared during the difficult days were not just words. They were links that connected him to his essence, to his family, and to the love that had always sustained him. George reflected on how each tale brought memories to the surface, bringing laughter and tears, but above all, a deeper understanding of what truly mattered in life. He realized that success was not merely in material achievements but in the quality of the relationships built along the way. The true meaning of success revealed itself in moments of vulnerability and in the strength he found in the presence of his family. As days went by, George devoted himself to creating new memories with Lily and Margaret. The afternoons were filled with walks in the park, where they shared laughter and new stories. Lily, with her curious and dreamy nature, led George to reflect on his own dreams and aspirations, reminding him that it was never too late to start anew. He felt inspired to write his own stories, recalling the teachings he had accumulated over the years and the lessons he now wanted to pass on to future generations. Margaret, in turn, saw the transformation in George with joy. The love she had always nurtured for her family now blossomed even more vibrantly. She remembered how, in times of difficulty, unity and shared stories were essential in facing storms. With that, each day became a new opportunity to celebrate life and the relationships they had built. On a sunny afternoon, while sitting at the table, George looked at the two women he loved so much and said, "You have shown me that even in difficulties, there is a light that guides us. I learned that it is essential to share our stories, for they are what keep us united and help us overcome challenges." George's words resonated in their hearts, and Lily felt a special warmth realizing the impact her actions and decisions had on her grandfather's life. She knew the journey hadn't been easy, but each moment of pain had brought forth a deeper love, a stronger connection. Thus, as time passed, the family became an example of overcoming and love. George, now more self-assured, began to share his own stories, inspiring others around him. He became a storyteller, sharing his experiences at community events, always emphasizing the importance of family, love, and unity. Life continued to flow, and with it, new memories were created. George, Lily, and Margaret learned that each day was a gift, a new chance to connect and celebrate life. They became a beacon of hope for many, showing that even after storms, there is always a rainbow waiting to be discovered. Their story, filled with love, overcoming, and renewal, became a legacy that would undoubtedly be told for many years. And so, George, surrounded by his family, smiled, knowing that true wealth was right there in front of him, in the love, the shared stories, and the certainty that together they could face any challenge life threw their way. Now, at the end of this journey, George and his family invite you to reflect on your own stories and the importance of sharing them. What have you learned from your experiences? Why not leave a comment sharing a bit of your journey? Every story matters and can inspire others to find strength in difficult moments. Like and subscribe to receive more heartwarming stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. Join us in this celebration of love and overcoming.